that we can share the link later. So let me go ahead and let our eager participants in now. All right. All right, you guys, welcome to the Teach Houston Alumni Panel for Spring 2020. We are streaming this session, so we will be sharing the recording for this with everyone. But I want to welcome our awesome panelists. We are really, really fortunate. We normally do this session. We've been doing this for, I want to say 2 years now, maybe 3 years, something like that, with the society. It's always done in conjunction with the Teach Houston banquet. So we have food normally with this session. And really good food, but we just have to rely on our own kitchens tonight and just do with what we can. Everything is different given the circumstances we're all in right now. So our alumni panel is taking place through Zoom, but we're really, really fortunate that we have amazing alumni from Teach Houston who are willing to spend their evening with us answering questions, letting you guys grill them. So I'm gonna go ahead and welcome, we've got Miss Becca Love and Miss Ariana Ibarra, Miss Carrie Ann King, and Mr. Carlos Perez. I'm gonna give them each a moment to share a little bit about when they graduated from Teach Houston, what roles they've had so far, and what they are currently doing. They each also represent a different school district in the Houston area. So guys, if you can share kind of what your school districts are doing in the pandemic, that's like one of the top questions that I have submitted over here is, what are they doing? So if you guys can share a little bit about yourself and also what your districts are doing during this time. So Becca, if you can get started.
Sure. Hello there. I was an Algebra 1 teacher in Aldine. So I taught Algebra 1 for 3 years, was promoted to department chair, taught for 1 more year, and then was promoted to an instructional specialist in Aldine. This year I moved down to Spring Branch. So I am an instructional coach at Springwoods High School over our mathematics team for 9 through 12. So I have been able to see the leadership side in multiple districts. I did the Teach Houston's master's program upon graduation of my undergrad, and I am now getting a doctorate at U of H in educational leadership. So hopefully here in the next 1.5 years, I will be Dr. Love. And all of it started because of Dr. Shields, who when I was 18 years old, I had no idea what I was gonna do with my life. And so I sat in the office with her and she said, "This is Teach Houston." And I said, "Okay, that's my life calling, this is it." So I have been Teach Houston through and through from the very beginning, and has been now three-peat at U of H for undergrad, master's, and doctorate. So in Spring Branch, it's tough. So we have, I'm at a low income school, and so we have lots of students without internet. So that has been a really big challenge. We're doing everything that we can to keep things as simple and streamlined as possible. So we have an online management system called It's Learning that all of the teachers are pushing their work out through, but we are doing everything we can to keep it as simple, 1 assignment a week, same format, so that way it is as simple as possible for students. So.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on getting married and on starting your doctorate and all of that. Really, really good stuff there. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and then we have Ms. Ariana Ibarra.
Hi guys, so I teach biology at South Houston High School in Pasadena ISD. I graduated in the fall of 2018. And I'm finishing up my first year as teaching, so this has been an interesting way to finish my first year as teaching with the pandemic. And I also started my master's degree at Texas Tech. I'm getting it in STEM curriculum and instruction. So it's been interesting. It's been an adventure. But in my district, we are using a platform called Ingenuity. So what it is the TEKS, we've used this for years for credit recovery. Some students are familiar with it. We just rolled it out where they're learning about the last few TEKS for biology. But like Becca, I am at a low income, high needs school. And so a lot of my students have not had internet. They don't have tablets. So within the past week or so, they've just gotten tablets. They've just gotten internet. And I'm calling home constantly, like telling parents like if they don't have internet, like it's not going to affect their grade. It's not the students, like it's not their fault. So it's a lot of communication between parents and students, and always on remind 101, like, hey, how are you doing, and just keeping up with my kids and making sure that they're okay above all, with everything that's happening.
Wow, first year and you've got the pandemic. I will say in one of my classes we were talking about, they were asking about my first year, and it was around that 2009 recession when all the school districts were letting teachers go and there were protests from students and all that stuff. And so that was my first year of teaching, and I thought that was a really strange time to start, but this is definitely the weirdest start to a teaching career, I would say. You're going to be ready for everything after this. Next is Carrie Ann King.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carrie King, and I graduated from U of H and Teach Houston in 2012. I was hired at Lamar High School, and I've actually been there since that time. I started out as a classroom teacher in biology and chemistry and taught different levels of biology and chemistry. I became the school's data specialist. During my third year, I was a teacher leader. I was moved into an instructional coordinator role outside the classroom. So I did professional development for teachers and coached and supported teachers. Last year, I was made Dean of Instruction mid-year. And then this year, I'm an assistant principal for half of the 9th grade class. And that's about 350 students. Right now, we actually, Houston ISD, I'm at Lamar High School. So we're in Houston ISD, and we actually are a one-to-one district for all high schools. So every student has a laptop, and Houston ISD partnered with Sprint to provide Wi-Fi hotspots to students that qualify for free or reduced lunch. So they did a great, and this was last year they did this as well with the hotspot. So it wasn't because of the pandemic, it was something that was in the works because they really wanted to ease that digital divide. So we have actually had an easy time because my high school does flipped classroom in all classrooms, and we have really pioneered the use of tech within the district. We call it the hub, but it's learning, and our teachers have used that for years. So our transition was not very difficult. Out of our student body of about 2,800 students, we're down to about 6 students that we have not been able to reach, which is pretty impressive.
That's really good. And
Yeah.
and so Carrie, like how many schools in HISD would you say went to this hub system the way you guys?
The hub, It's Learning is the learning management system for the entire district. Not everybody used it as much as Lamar has. We really used it for, as an administrator, that's where my teachers post lessons for kids, and we're constantly using it. So it's really more used in the high school setting than in elementary school and even middle school. And not all high schools were using it to a big extent. So there were some schools that had a big learning curve when we had to go digital.
Wow. Yeah, I can see that. Thank you. Mr. Carlos Perez.
Hi, everyone. I'm kind of like in the middle of everybody. I'm not starting. I'm not towards the leadership yet. I'm going into ending my third year of teaching. I graduated from Teach Houston back in 2017. I'm going into ending my third year. I'm in charge. I'm the lead teacher for the ESL biology program at my school, the only teacher now. I've taken into the role of mentor teacher. So I am a mentor for new teachers. This is my second year doing that. And actually this year was my first year having a student teacher. So that was pretty awesome. In our schools, I teach at Sci-Fair, specifically Cypress Ridge High School. We're one of the only few schools at a high need school, so it's been a learning curve with laptops specifically. Half of the district had the resources for us, and the other half, like us, we didn't have it. So we're still into week 3, and we haven't really figured out a way to go with technology. So we're using Edgenuity as well. Ooh, wonderful program. Uh, but a lot of the kids, what they've done is they're using their cell phones as a big resource. So regardless of how hard it has been, they're on their phones, going through stuff, asking questions. So learning has been happening for the last 3 weeks, even though they don't have a laptop. So that's been pretty awesome.
Wow, yeah, that's incredible, and that digital divide between schools and districts where students have the laptops versus those that don't. I know that even teaching at UH, you know, we have students who have gone back home and are in areas where they don't have great internet connection, or they're back home and you know, don't have the best situation to study in the way that they would at their dorms. So it's something that's impacted all of us. So thank y'all for sharing that. And I like that we've got this great mix of experience here too, from instructional leadership, administration, first-year teacher, hang in there, and also third-year teacher mentor too. So I'm glad to have that. So I've been looking at the questions that have been submitted. Just like always, we'll go through some questions that are submitted, and then towards the end, we'll just open it up to questions that folks might have that they just want to ask on the spot. But one of the questions that's come up quite a few times is going back to student teaching semester. For some of us, it was a little bit longer ago than others. What advice would you give yourself if you could go back to your student teaching semester?
So I think that it is very important to keep computer files of everything you do. So when I was student teaching, it was right after working with Teach Houston as a student worker. And as a student worker, I was told, like, you make a folder for every unit, you make days for each unit, and then in that days, you load your content. So my first year, I would stay, I mean, in student teaching as well, I would spend hours after school preparing, but because I was able to save all of it, every year after just became tweaking and perfecting as opposed to reinventing the wheel. So if there was one thing that I think was most beneficial of student teaching, is to be very organized with your files. Don't just dump it into your desktop and then tell yourself that you'll organize it later, because later will probably never happen. And when you're in year 1 and you have more meetings and more emails than you realize would ever be a thing, it's much easier to have your electronic files nicely organized from when you spent all that time perfecting it during student teaching.
Yeah, and that's good advice, I would say, just at any point in your career. You know, they always say, like, and it's true, your first year is survival. You try to, but you will forget to save everything your first year because you're making so much new stuff. Second year is when you start tweaking it more, reflecting on it more, and that's why third year is the, you know, kind of like the smooth sailing year, because now you've done it twice, you've actually saved it, you've got the best formats of it, and you've got more confidence going in third year too. So really good advice there to save it. A few questions have come up about student teaching, so they want to know what advice you would have, and also how your student teaching experience was too, and just, you know, what advice you would give them going into student teaching.
I would say, like, one of the biggest things that I learned from student teaching was asking questions. Ask your CT so many questions. Like, it's okay to ask questions, because it's going to be a moment that you're going to be in your classroom and you won't know what to do. But if you've asked, your CT has experience and use that experience. They know so many tricks about content. They know tricks about classroom management. So they'll give you a light that whenever you go into August, you kind of know what to do, and you're not blind on, oh, how do I start? Well, you have a CT right now and they have experience. So I think just asking lots of questions.
Yeah, that's a really good one. It's really good.
I would also say, like, when you're student teaching, to get involved, like if your CT has tutorials, stay after school if you can with your CT. That way you can, first you get to know the students better, like you memorize their names faster. And you help out with tutorials, or like, hey, is there anything I can help with? And if I had a student, she asked me when I was student teaching if I could go to her volleyball game. And I was like, yeah, sure. So I went, and it meant the world to her. And it was just getting involved and going out and observing other teachers, because each teacher teaches differently. They have different instructions, different methods to their classroom. So I went out and did that as well. Um, but just getting involved, like helping out with like tutorials, or seeing how your CT runs tutorials. That way, whenever you're teaching, you're good to go. Like I learned very quickly, have a sign-in sheet. You write the time you got there, so that way I can log your hours and write when you're leaving, and then put why you're here. Because students come up to me and they're like, Missy Barr, I need a higher grade. Like I'm missing this assignment. I'm like, I don't know what assignment you're missing. You need to tell me. So, and that was extremely helpful.
Very good advice. Very good advice.
I've got just 2 pieces of advice to tack on. The first one is definitely go and observe other teachers. That's fantastic. And I would even go and say, observe teachers that don't teach the same content as you, because then you're looking more at what they do in their classroom versus thinking about teaching that content. So when you do those observations, take advantage of all of that time and see other people in different disciplines. And the second one is, like Dr. Manuel said, it's about survival your first year pretty much. Make sure that you do take time for yourself, because if you don't put on your own oxygen mask, it's going to run you ragged sometimes if you totally invest yourself. So make sure that you're putting self-care into your routine.
That's really, really good advice. Both of those. I think some of the best teaching strategies I picked up were when my first year teaching, not during student teaching, but during my first year, I got to observe English and history teachers, and I think a speech teacher, and even a choir teacher as well. And just the classroom management that they had in their classes, it was like those were the things I was focusing on. Like you said, I never thought about that, but I think that's why I was so focused on their classroom management. So that is really helpful. I'll say one thing about student teaching advice, what I wish I had known when I was student teaching. Even though it feels like, you're going every day student teaching, you're there all day, it is temporary. It can start to feel like you're just like, this is your life, you're going to be teaching here, these are going to be your colleagues. It might end up being the school you teach at, but it doesn't have to. You're going to have a lot of job offers as you're leaving, and it is temporary. And there may be some things about your cooperating teacher style that aren't in line with your philosophy. That's okay too. You don't have to be just like your cooperating teacher. A lot of times student teachers will feel that pressure that they have to like literally do all the same things and teach in the same ways. But you don't. You'll have your own teaching style and your own teaching philosophy, and that's okay. And pretty soon you will have your own classroom too. So it does happen. It feels like forever sometimes, but it does happen. Something, Ms. King mentioned that is a part of this as well. You mentioned taking some time for yourself and all of that. So one of the questions that's on here is, what support systems did you find in place to help prevent teacher burnout? Do you guys want to speak to that? What support systems you had personally, or what your school has to kind of help prevent that teacher burnout?
I think one thing that's really important is when it's hiring season, once you've done student teaching, you being a math or science teacher makes you extremely valuable. And so when you go through interviews, I would also ask, and hopefully things will go back to normal, we'll be teaching from schools and not from computers at that time. So I would definitely suggest that in your interviews, if it seems like a good match, to ask them to observe a team, because it is your team that you're teaching with that really makes your life so much easier. And for teachers that I know who have been miserable in their first and second year, it's not because of the students, it's almost always because of their team members or because of their administration. So I think that the number one reason why people leave their first year or second year schools that they decide to go to are because of the adults that they're working with. So know that you're valuable and you don't have to take the first job offer that you're given, that you can ask them about how teams work together, and even ask to go in and observe a team during a PLC. And that will tell you a lot about what is to come if you become one of those team members. So I think that your sanity has a lot to do with finding a handful of good people to work with that will share the same passion as you.
Yeah, really good point. Thank you. Any other advice for preventing teacher burnout?
I have some advice, and that is I read about this thing called marigolds and walnut trees. And so marigolds are really great. They're friendly. They're very peaceful. Walnut trees tend to be invasive and take over. And so when you're in a school, one of the ways to help avoid burnout is to avoid the teacher workroom, because that's where the walnut trees congregate. They grow really well there. The soil must be fantastic. But avoiding the people that are just constantly negative is a big part of avoiding burnout, because the more you hear negativity and the more you surround yourself with that, the worse it's going to be for you. And no matter where you go, you're going to find people that are negative. And so find the people that make you happy, your work friends, your work buddies, people that we used to have book club, and we would go out every Friday and we would read books. It's just, we go, we hang out, we have a couple beers, we talk, so it's people that you can hang out with outside of work that foster those relationships, because that will sustain you.
Yeah, you need a group of teacher friends to vent with, because first off, no one understands it like teachers. No one's gonna get your stories. They're gonna ask too many questions. It's gonna take you too long to get through your stories. So you need your teacher friends that you can vent with at the end of it, because that's a part of self-care as a teacher too, but not in the teacher lounge.
And I just want to add to that. I mean, another thing that I found very useful my first year was just always keeping in mind, why am I doing this? So you always got to keep your why, because like you're going to get stuck with a lot of things. There's going to be a lot of things coming at you. But if you keep your purpose in mind, it just doesn't feel as much. And then you have to find those connections. And I would say even keep your Teach Houston people with you. Teach Houston friends are the best, because they know what you're going through. And sometimes if things are not going according to our philosophy, you want those teachers to be there with you to remind you, hey, this is why we're doing this.
Yeah, at the start of the Teach Houston program, there were only like 8 or 10 of us or something like that, and we were all so close, and that was so helpful. And I think that as the program's grown, now you guys have like 40 student teachers this semester, which is crazy, because my year we had 6 student teachers. And Ms. King, what was it? Do you remember? It was probably like 8 or something like that.
Yeah, it was somewhere between 6 to 10.
Yeah. So
small.
40 student teachers is just wild, but it's getting there. So the groups are getting bigger, but you definitely want to have your crew. You've got to keep in touch, because like I said, no one's going to understand it quite like them, what you're going through. Yeah. Really good advice on self-care and on having those support systems. So again, reiterating, check with the schools what types of supports they have. When you interview, it's not a bad idea to ask them, if they support professional development for their teachers, or how the teachers get professional development. All of those things, including observing and meeting with an actual PLC, like an actual team. It's going to give you a good feel, because you are interviewing them just as much as they are interviewing you. And it's really important to keep that in mind. So another question that has come up is about classroom management. So can you guys each share maybe your one favorite classroom management strategy?
Sure. So as a first year teacher, I very much looked like a 16-year-old girl walking into a classroom with heels on. So at, what am I, 29 years old, I still sometimes look like a 16-year-old girl with heels on. So what I did for my first year is on a Post-it note, I wrote down be consistent, and then I put it on my desktop. So that way I didn't pick favorites. I didn't, it was easier. Oh my goodness, sorry. Having 4 dogs is fun. It made me more accountable for myself. I think that the other biggest thing of classroom management is you have to have a plan going into every single day. So never show up to class not knowing what you're going to do for that either 55 or 90 minutes. So in Teach Houston, you guys are so well prepared on what kind of questions you're asking, what the flow of the lesson, the transitions, things like that. So once you start in your first year, make sure that you are equally consistent, that you have a plan every day, you are confident in what you're doing, and then you're consistent with your rules. So if you say no cell phones, especially, oh my goodness, in the last 6 years of education, what I noticed as a first year teacher versus what I see now in classrooms is a totally different world. So I do not, it's one of those things I'm not jealous of first year teachers, because cell phone addiction is a very, very real thing right now. And if you let a student be on a cell phone in August and you're like, I'll take care of it later, by the time October comes, they will be glued to their phones with no ability to remove it. And so that's one of the things that I see first year teachers struggle with, is that they want to be nice for the first couple of weeks, and then they tell themselves they'll get harder on their students as you go, but it doesn't work well that way. So set your expectations early and stay consistent with those expectations. So that way, by the time, we jokingly call it Shocktober, because October is when the honeymoon phase is over. Between Shocktober and January, your life will be much easier if you maintain that consistency from the beginning.
Really good advice. Thank you.
I want to piggyback off of the cell phone thing. So when I started, we had a huge faculty meeting, and a lot of our board members for Pasadena went walking into some schools, and they just saw their kids like on the phone. So the board passed a rule. Something happened where we ended up with nice cell phone caddies in our rooms. Well, at South Houston, our science labs were reconstructed. So I was in a portable for the first 6 about weeks-ish of school. So putting up their cell phones was no problem. They were putting it like your seat number 1, put it in number 1. And I'd be like, hey, like there's 20 of y'all in here and there's 10 phones. Like from day 1, I was very strict about the phones. Like I was like, I do not want to see it. If I see it, I'm taking it up and it's mine till the end of the day. But when we moved into my new lab room, the cell phone caddy had to get set up right behind my desk, because I was the only like mounting that there was. And I was like, I didn't like my students going behind my desk because I have a brand new computer, and just like, no. So all right, phone's in the pocket or in your backpack, and if I see it, it's mine. And I had some of my colleagues are like, that's not gonna work. Your kids are just gonna have their cell phones out. It worked. And like, you're smiling underneath your desk, like I know what you're doing. And I just stick out my hand, and without any arguments, they'd give me their phone. Then it wasn't a problem. And actually, my principal and an AP had a challenge of how many classrooms had their phones out. Well, they came into my classroom looking around, and because they noticed the cell phone caddy was empty, but they were like, Miss Ibarra's students, none of her kids had their phones out. So it was brought up in a department leader faculty wide meeting how I had it very strict with my phones. Like phones were not allowed to be out, even like up to now, like before spring break, like phones were never out in the room. There was some exceptions, like you finish your quiz, like you can listen to music, go to sleep. Like if that keeps you quiet, so other students can finish their tests and go ahead. But like phones from day 1, I was like, put them up, don't see them, because if you're not consistent, like you think, oh, I'm gonna start off like being nice and friends with the kids, then get strict, it's not going to work. It's going to be very, very hard for you to try to reel them back in and try to implement rules, especially when they're used to getting away with having cell phones out all the time.
And
I didn't.
it's hard when they can do it in their other classes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanted to add on that. I think that part of the cell phones goes back with routines. That's my biggest thing with classroom management. If I have routines and my students know what to do, they'll be fine. You need to think about a routine. How do you want your students to come in? What are they going to do when they come in? What are they supposed to do when they leave? What is your restroom procedure? So it's all about your routines, and the kids get comfortable with it. And I think another thing that goes with classroom management is knowing your students and knowing when you need to, when they're having a bad day, when they're having a good day. Otherwise, that's another thing of classroom management, because if you don't have a relationship with a student, it's very difficult to do any type of discipline.
Mm-hmm.
I want to add on, because the relationships are hugely important, because that's how you get kids to buy in. That's how you get kids to do what you expect. My advice is have a few non-negotiable things. Like, I had 4 classroom rules in my classroom. We are prompt, we are prepared, we are productive, and we are polite. And everything, the kids then told me, what do those things look like? So we had a social contract set up, but this is completely non-negotiable, and that consistency is hugely important as well. So if you have a ton of rules, it's going to be real tough for kids to follow. So I would suggest bite size your non-negotiables, no more than like 4 or 5.
I think I had like be respectful, be responsible, and I forget what the third B was,
Probably
but there were 3.
because you were in a lab.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. It's, when we're talking about classroom management over here, another question that comes up that a lot of teachers who are going into teaching often wonder: what happens when a student gets disrespectful? How do you handle that? That's like that nightmare that I think haunts you when you're about to go into the classroom, is what am I going to do? Like, I still remember my first year teaching. Every time I would ask my students to do something and they would do it, in my mind, I would just be like, wow, I did not have another plan. Like, I had nothing else prepared if you were gonna say no and not do this. So I was always like happily surprised when they did it. But that is something teachers worry about. So I guess, what advice would you have, or if you've had that happen where students gone off or gotten disrespectful towards you personally, and how you would handle it, or how you would advise they handle it?
That's a great question. So I think that it goes right back to what Carlos was saying, where it's all about relationships. If you show kids that you respect them, then in turn, they will respect you. So in my 6 years in the classroom, I never had a single time where I blew up on a kid or a kid blew up on me or anything of that sort, because they knew from day one that I was there to help them learn, and I would take them from where they were and allow them to grow in my classroom and be vulnerable and be real students without me being judgmental or like too bossy towards them. So one of my favorite stories was, I think it was like November. So it was middle end-ish of first semester. And it was my second year of teaching. And again, like young girl, like 16-year-old girl in heels, basically is what I looked like. And so there was a boy that walked in who was like 6'2", covered in tattoos, grill in his face. He had never been in my classroom before. And so he walks in and he looks me like up and down, like from like my forehead to my toes, and like smacked his lips. And then it was just, I was like, my heart was beating so fast. Like, I don't know what to do. But I just stood there and I was like, okay, be consistent. Like, welcome to my classroom. This is your notebook. You're going to walk in, you're going to get your notebook, get your calculator. This is your seat, and this is how it's going to work. So the kid was actually not in school because he was expelled for almost a full year for punching his previous principal in the face because the principal had told him to remove his grill. And I'm sure he was gang related of some sort. And so he was very against that idea. And so after that first day that I met him, I went to my AP and I was like, this child, what am I going to do? And they're like, Miss Pell, you just need to be consistent. You'll be okay. So I took that boy under my wing and I like showed him that I cared about him and that he was more than his appearance. So at the time I was the sponsor for student council. And so he would stay after school, I'm sure because he wanted to avoid whatever was going on at home. And so he would watch us in student council and like see what we were doing right after school. And so we would pick up recycling and clean it at the school and things like that. So after about 2 months, he came up to me and said, Miss Pell, I would really like to be part of student council. Do you mind if I stay with you guys after school and help run your recycling program? I'm like, of course, absolutely you can. So he would stay after, and the APs would kind of give me the eye, like, do you know what you're doing? Do you know what that kid is capable of doing? I was like, it's fine. He respects me and I respect him. We're good. And so he was so respectful for the entire rest of the school year. And he had totally turned his act around by May. He was the most improved student, chosen by like four of his teachers, where he came in as one student and he left his freshman year as a totally respectful and motivated kid. And so that was definitely one of my favorite stories, where when he came in on day one, like I'm sure that many teachers judged him and immediately put him in a corner for looking like a bad kid. But when you show them that they respect you, it makes a huge difference in the outcome for that student.
So it was my first year teaching, 4th day of school. A student came in and he puts his head down, like he instantly like falls asleep, and I'm like, and I'm like, okay, can't let him fall asleep in class because students are gonna think it's okay. So I'm gently like, hey, come on, like wake up. And I think about the second time I went over to wake him up, he wakes up and curses me out in Spanish, like all loud across the room, and students are like, oh my gosh, and then they just went back to their work, and I was like, okay. And he went back to putting his head down. So when he put his head down, I was like, all right, I was like, this is what I need you to do. I was like, we can talk about this outside. We're going to talk about this tomorrow. Like, I think I talked to him that day, and I was like, I just need you to work on this worksheet. You have your notes, just do the worksheet for me. Like, you can complete the front. I know you can do it. So he kept his head down for about a minute, and then he picks up his head and he starts doing his work. He finished the whole worksheet. The next day he came in, he was like, I'm sorry for that. He goes, I was just tired, and I'm just like, that's just how I react to things. So I was like, it's okay. Like, I talked it out with him, and ever since, like, he was like, I'm not going to do it again. And he didn't. This kid he just, same thing like as Becca, like tattoos and just different, like you can look at this kid and think he's up to no good. But he came a long way with me, and it turns out it was his 3rd year taking first semester biology. So he had been there, and he would come in and get his notebook, mind his own business, do his worksheet, and then he'd look at me, give me a thumbs up, and he kind of like put his head down to the side where other students could see he's awake, but he's, I'm like, okay. And other kids knew not to mess with him because he had gotten into more trouble after that. But I was like, in the moment, I was like, what do I do? This is horrible. Like, I can't, like, what would teach you? And then I was like, you know what? It's okay. And it worked out.
Yeah. It's like all of a sudden in that moment, everything you've learned is like, it's go time.
Yeah.
And I think that's the importance of self-care, because if you take care of yourself, you have to have patience. Like, a lot of students will push your buttons, every possible button, but you have to keep it all together and you cannot lose it. I mean, I've had kids being very disrespectful to me, but I take the position of I'm the adult and I want to keep being the same consistency. Just like Becca said, you have to be consistent with everything, the way you treat students, even when they're having a bad day. And come on, they have bad days sometimes, just like us. Sometimes you're gonna be having a bad day. It's probably not even the kid's fault, but it's probably you not, just not in the right day.
I think a big thing is to not take it personally if a kid is disrespectful. Remember, they're young, their brains have not fully formed, they're going to be impulsive in certain ways. And 9 times out of 10, when a kid is disrespectful in class, it's misbehaves in class, it's because of something else that's going on outside of your classroom. It's not you and it's not something there. And so keeping that in mind, giving that kid I would always take kids out one-on-one, and we'd step to the hall and we'd have a talk and be like, tell me what's going on, because I know this is not you. But you have to have those relationships first before you can do that. And as a teacher and now an administrator, as soon as you call someone in from outside, so as soon as I'm called into a classroom, that teacher has just given up their power. And so I always handled everything in-house when I was a teacher, until, you know, I had one extreme situation where the kid had other issues, medical issues. And so, but everything else, I handle it, because once you're out of my classroom, I have no control over your learning. I have no control over your discipline, and I want you in my classroom learning. And so those are good things to do. And as an administrator, if I get a lot of calls from a teacher who every time a kid looks at them in a funny way, I start to think about the teacher.
That's a really important thing, because it's hard not to take it personally. Everything about teaching is personal. Your handouts, your lesson, everything, you put so much time into it. And you know, you were probably up till 10 o'clock working, putting things together, and then you go in and then you have this interaction with the student. It's hard not to take it personally in that moment. You know, another thing that I will add is use your resources that you have around you. So if the kids are in sports, they have coaches. Talk to the coaches. You'd be surprised how much you can get from talking to their coaches, because a lot of times they are mentors for those kids. And if the coach has your back, which they will, that's going to help you, because sometimes it's just a matter of, have you talked to that kid one-on-one on your own? You know, is that kid just showing off in front of class? Sometimes it's also, I had one year just a bad combination in my class where I had 4 or 5 boys that should not have been in a class together, because they were in their sports teams together and all of that. And it was just a matter of moving maybe one of them into a different class period just to break that group up. And I talked to the counselors, and they were like, you know, those kids should not be in the room together. Like, that's not, we actually try to keep them separated. We know about this group. And it was just a matter of one of them still being my student, but just in a different class period, completely changing the dynamic. So don't feel like you have to figure everything out on your own. You do have other resources, other people, other teachers who maybe had them the year before. Sometimes if you're like, something's off here, see if you can talk to maybe the department chair or someone and see if someone else who's had this student might have some advice for you on what might be going on. A lot of times you'll figure it out on your own, but it's okay if you reach out to their coaches or counselors to get some assistance with that, especially in your first year. So thank y'all for sharing those insights on how to handle that. Some other questions that we have over here is, you know, your first year teaching. So Teach Houston, of course, prepares inquiry-based lessons, 5E lesson plans, interactive, all of that. Going into your first year's teaching, how realistic was it for you to implement all of those teaching strategies, and what advice would you have for, you know, teachers who are worried about how they're going to bring all of these changes into their classroom their first year?
So I think that in STAR tested subjects, your hands are more tied than they are in non-STAR tested subjects. So if you're a high school math teacher, geometry is a wonderful course for doing 5E, because so much of it is based on applications. Even Algebra 2, there's a lot of options you can do there. So when you're in Algebra 1, because it is STAR tested, you can't do 5E every single day, but you definitely want the structure where every unit or every chapter that you do starts with something that is inductive. So with exponentials, for example, so us being online, our only unit left to teach this year in Algebra 1 was exponential functions. And for years in the past, I have seen schools just go straight into like, look at it in the calculator. What are the key attributes? Where are your asymptotes? But instead, by starting it with a real life, this is why exponentials exist. So we did a big lesson on COVID-19 and how the virus is doubling and what that means and how it applies to the formula. So I think that in every unit that you do, it's very useful to tie it to something real life as your introduction, as your engage. And then it might take 4 days to go through the actual 5E cycle, where they're doing like regular practice problems in between, to have that there. So I think that's also the best way to do PBL, is to introduce it as this is how it works in the real world, and then tie the concrete facts of this is how you factor. Let's factor for 3 days to make sure you know how to factor. So if you're going into a STAR tested subject, just know that there's going to be a lot of administrative pressure for data and test scores, and making sure that you are comparable to the rest of the team. So you can't scrap everything that the team has done before and say, nope, I'm going to do this my own way, because they're probably going to slap your wrist and say, no, we need to make sure our data is aligned. But definitely, if you're non-STAR tested, you have a lot of freedom there. But regardless, it's really good to start your lessons with an engage, regardless of what you're teaching. So being able to go through the 5E cycle at least once or twice a unit is going to be beneficial for your students.
What I've learned from I mean, I'm in a standardized subject, I'm biology. What I've learned from the 5E is pretty much what I try to do is incorporate more of the student actions. What are they supposed to do during a 5E lesson? So you try to incorporate those during the week. So and elaborate, what are the student actions based on? And that's what we implement every week. I mean, if we do an experiment, how are we going to try to implement the way students should be thinking through a 5E lesson?
And I know that with the 5E lessons, it's mostly student-centered. Students are doing the work, students are doing the heavy lifting. And I'll tell you that the appraisal system that's used to essentially grade teachers and rate teachers, it factors in to become a highly effective teacher, you need to have more focus on the students. Now, does that mean you have to have a full 5E lesson every day? No, and you should not feel guilty if you don't do that. My first year, I taught biology and chemistry. I had a wooden floor, small little classroom. I did not really have access to labs. I wound up doing kitchen chemistry. Essentially, I brought stuff in for them to use because I couldn't get down to the labs to use them. Don't feel guilty if you can't do 5E every day. Don't feel guilty if nothing is completely hands-on, but do know that what you're learning is preparing you to give more ownership to your students. And that's going to make you a highly effective teacher, because you're going to be able to incorporate a whole lot more of that where the students are doing the explaining. That's a perfect way to do that, to incorporate that explain part where the students do it, and also improve your ratings as far as teacher appraisals go.
Yeah, really important. I think it's also important to remember that, you know, you are not defined or judged by your first year of teaching or even, you know, your first week. I tell you what, I would make so many changes from first period to like third period for first period, you guys. You know, I just hope that in the future at some point they would get a science teacher like later on in the day, just so they weren't always first period for science, because that's when it doesn't matter how much you prepare, that's when things usually go wrong in the lab. But you know, it's all of this is preparing you to become a more effective teacher. Your goal should be to do as much 5E, project-based instruction, all of that, but you want to aim to be interactive. You want to aim to involve your students, to bring them into the lesson. And that may not happen as to the best of your ability every week, but you'll get there. The first year is not going to be the year that reflects everything else that happens after it. You will always have time to grow and get better at your craft. So don't you know, just put that much pressure on yourself. You are Teach Houston, and you do have a lot of skills that will help you as you continue through the through your teaching career. So I do have some more questions here, but we've got 9 minutes, so I do want to open the floor up for questions. So if you guys have any questions for our panelists, if you can either raise your hand or type the question in the chat. Might be easiest if you raised your hand, but if you can't use your microphone, you can type your question in the chat. Tuan?
Hello. First, thank you for all the wonderful stories and advice you give. I don't have a camera, but I was like smiling the whole time. So Miss Becca Love mentioned something about not picking favorites. Is this some like inner circle teacher rule?
No, I mean, to be honest, I always have favorites. You just can't make it obvious. So I think that you are going to naturally pick favorites based on, like, some of my teachers work really, really well with football boys. And so for some reason, every year for like, I mean, some teachers have taught 7, 8 years, and they just, like, the football boys become their favorites. So what you need to be sure of is that you are not making that obvious. So you can't favor them. You can't let them use the bathroom more often. You can't let them use their phone. You will have kids that you just like a lot. Like they're great kids. And so I think it's not a rule to not have favorites. It's just a rule to not show favoritism, is what I would say to
that. Good answer. Any other questions, you guys? Yolanda?
Hi, everybody. So my question goes especially to Carlos. I was trying to type it, but I, in the future, want to also be an ESL bio teacher. So one of the things that's constantly in my mind is, how do you make it different for them? Because I was an ENL student, and there's still words in my college career that are so difficult for me to spell and pronounce. Can't even imagine for a child. So how do you make them able to not only master the English part of the term and process, but also the content of it differently from just being it taught in English? Because I know, like, for example, you can't teach them how you would say, I don't know, sell in Spanish, because they would know that, but they need to be able to be tested for it in English.
So thank you for the question. So when you become an ESL biology teacher, you are an English teacher as well. So a lot of the content you teach in English at the same time. So the way we do it at my school, we start with the basics on the very first semester. So we try to do a lot of vocabulary-based activities. We try not to do too much of the more abstract concepts, but we do a lot of things that they can pronounce, memorize. So we spend a whole first semester with the very basics, like a lot of the memorization part of the words, because they're very good at it. Because they're learning the language. So, and they learn a lot of English as well. So we do a lot of pronunciation, we do a lot of writing, a lot of reading. So it's all combined. So you're pretty much turning into an English teacher when you're teaching an ESL biology course. And then you'll be surprised, but the kids, by the time you make it to January, they speak English. And some of the kids that knew like 1, 2 words, by the time they get into January, they're speaking full English. And this is the moment when we catch up. Like, we're behind now, it's the time to catch up, because now you know enough English for me to start building on the higher level concepts.
And how do you make that first part of the process a lot more inquiry based, other than just throwing words at them for them to just memorize?
And that's one of the things, we don't really do vocabulary memorization. So what I do is every unit we'd start, and we start with a vocabulary list. We pronounce all the words and we repeat like 3 times. And then we move on to similar activities that I would do with my regular kids, except that I expand those activities into 2 to 3 days. We essentially end up doing the same labs that we do with the other kids, but we just take longer so they can still get that same experience. And more projects. So first semester, and then we do more projects as well. So this year we ended up doing a cell project, we did a virus project, we did an ecosystem project. So with them, that works as well. And then you have them present those projects so they can practice the vocabulary.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I want to add on to what Carlos said real quick. So I also teach ESL, but I have an ESL aide with me in the room. So we would split, like, she would take the ESL kids and work with them, and I would work with my native speaking students, like English speaking students. But one thing my Pasadena has, so we have what we call like our cheat sheet pictures. So it's like a bunch of pictures that I could show it to anybody on the street and they don't know what it means, but I teach it to my students. And so they can write whatever they want on it, whatever's going to help them with the content. And so with a lot of my ESL students, they are writing what it's going to help them remember that content. So whenever they take tests, as soon as they get a test, they're writing what they know, and it could be in English or in Spanish, but they're always getting that cheat sheet picture, writing on it, and it helps them out. And a lot of them would tell me, like, if they didn't have this, then they wouldn't be able to like help them, or like to be able to help them with the questions or to answer questions. So I think each district varies too with what the approaches they have like to their ESL students.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Nadine?
Okay, so this goes to Dr. King. So you said you taught both chemistry and biology, right? So how has it teaching both subjects at the same time? Like being a biology major myself, so.
Oh, well, my degree was biochemistry, and so
Okay.
I had a good level of understanding of chemistry, but I didn't teach them in the same class period. So I had four chemistry classes and 2 biology classes my first year, and I was far more prepared for chemistry than I was for biology. But I had a really good biology team that came up with lessons and activities. And so my first year, I kind of just incorporated what they were doing. And then I would put my own spin on the explanations because I love analogies. And so I'd put analogies in there. So if you're hired for 2 preps, know that you're probably going to be better prepared for one than the other. And you may have to lean on a team for the second one.
Gotcha, thank you.
And then be ready for your brain to be split all over the place. It's insane.
I survived every year. I had at least
Yep.
2 preps. My last year in the classroom, I was a part-time admin. So I had 4 classes, and my 4 classes were freshman biology. And then we're an IB campus. So we have standard level and higher level, which are your college level courses. So I had standard level biology, higher level biology, and standard level chemistry. So it was kind of your gen chem first semester. So I had 4 different preps with 2 admin periods and 2 planning periods. That will split your brain.
It's actually fun though. I have 4. I do. I have L biology. I teach in SPED class. I teach my ESL class, and then I teach an ESL science. It's fun. You don't get bored.
No. Someone asked me today if I ever got bored teaching, and that's for sure. You never get bored teaching. My first year, I taught all physics, and then I had 1 aquatic science class. And it was like 6th period. So all of the football players were in the aquatic science class, like literally the whole football team. There was no textbook, no curriculum for aquatic science. And it was interesting. But yeah, I would have much rather taken a bio or a chemistry split at that point because I knew nothing about aquatic science. I taught them a lot of physics. Okay, so what other questions do you guys have? Any other last questions? One, that'll be our last one. One.
What is the best way to spend the summer as a teacher?
Ooh.
Great question. So I know everyone in this room from going out of state to conferences together. So I would say that the #1 absolute greatest way to spend your summer is to go to different PDs. Like Mariam was saying earlier, it's really awesome to have a principal that supports professional development. So in my first 5 years, I was very, very fortunate to have that. So she sent us to San Francisco. She sent us, I mean, really all over the country. So as long as it was a legitimate professional development, then we were able to give her like the itinerary of what we would learn, what we would bring back to campus. And it was a very, very useful way to connect with teachers around the country and become better teachers in the fall. So definitely PD is huge.
Thank you.
Yeah, I used my, at least 3 of my summers to get my master's degree. I was in a program where it was mostly the courses were over the summer. There were fall and spring courses, but it was at UT Austin. So would go and move to Austin for pretty much the whole summer. And to me, that was a really good experience. So it might be graduate school, it might be professional development, but please know that if it is traveling, that's good too, okay? If it is doing something totally non-work related, that is really good too. So don't listen to anyone that says like, oh, teachers, they get the whole summer off. You have more than earned it. So if you're spending time with your family, whatever it is, there are a lot of good ways. I will say that it doesn't have to be either or. You can take a portion of your summer for your personal travel, personal experiences, and then still have a portion of it to do professional development and do other things like that as well. So do find that balance, but no matter what, do take some time for yourself, because you will definitely need that.
And I'll add, enjoy sleeping in and going to the bathroom whenever you would like.
Going and eating lunch for longer than 13 minutes.
But
yeah.
I still to this day cannot eat lunch in a long, lingering fashion. No. It's gone in 10 minutes.
No, even when I go out to eat, I still finish in 13 minutes, like within that time frame every time. I will say this, when I became a mom, I was really happy. I knew how to eat my meals real fast. So it was a good thing, but yeah, enjoy all of that when you do get the chance. So before we close off, I do want to turn it over to Fernanda from the society.
Yeah. So thank you to the panelists for coming in. This has been very exciting, and I'm glad we were still able to do this even though we're online. Obviously, we all prefer to have free food, but we can wait for next semester. So for all the attendees who showed up, I know not everybody filled out the RSVP, and that's fine, but if you could just fill out the Google form that I just sent in the chat, and that is what we're going to use as proof that you were here. So it's just a really quick Google form, and then you're good to go.
Awesome. Thank you, Fernanda. All right, guys, I want to say thank you to our amazing panelists. Thank y'all so much. The fact that you guys are teaching online, doing all of these things, and you still made time to come out on a Thursday evening for this, it just says a lot to the type of educators you are and just how dedicated you guys are to the field and to Teach Houston. So we're really lucky to have you guys, lucky to have your insights and your expertise. Thank you for being so open and for sharing all of this. So really appreciate you guys. Thank y'all so much. And to our participants, someday you will be on the panel. I know our future panelists are in the audience right now. Thank y'all for being here, especially those of you who didn't need the PD credit but still came. Thank you guys. Thank you for your questions. All of the questions were submitted by students, and also the questions that you guys asked. It helped make this a really fun and interesting conversation. So we'll share out the recording. Thank you, everyone. Have a great, safe rest of the semester, and we will all be connecting soon. All right. I'm going to stick around in case someone has any questions for a few more minutes, but if not, y'all take care. Thank you guys so much. Bye.
Mariam, I think we ought to have one on interviewing, like a PD